Hi, everybody. This is Hondo Carpenter from Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast, and absolutely thrilled to have the guest that we have today. You have heard me say it. He is the greatest NFL writer of all time. Many people concur with that. He is the man that NFL owners and general managers would call before drafts because he's the perfecter of the draft board. Now, many mock draft, most people credit him as the inventor of it. He would argue with you and say, no, that's not true. Well, he's the one that perfected to the point that NFL owners, general managers would call him before the draft, during the draft. He votes in the NFL Hall of Fame, one of the most respected football minds ever. In fact, he is the reason that I became a sports journalist. Add to that, he is now one of my dearest friends. And when you can have a guy who's a hero, who becomes a friend, and you're not disappointed about his character, his integrity, him and I have been arm in arm with each other as we've gone through struggles in our life. And I not only respect him, I love him dearly. You know him, the one and only, the greatest NFL writer ever, Rick Goslin. Rick, thanks for joining us again, my friend.
I know, always my pleasure, but you already know that.
I appreciate you so much. Okay, first, I've got to dig in on several issues with you, but I have been talking for years about the quality of NFL officiating. Now, you and I are friends with some NFL refs.
Right.
I'm very close, Dean Look, who you know well, Spartan. But I'm friends with some current officials. I wouldn't say referees, but officials. It's terrible. There is a lot of talk about make them full time. I don't know that I agree with that, because when I talk to the officials who I'm friends with now, they're like, Hondo, we're already working full time. It's not going to make a difference. We're already watching film. We're doing meetings. So I've said I would like to add another official, but up in a box, where they have immediate ability to review anything, and anything that's called that can be overturned, that they have that ability, get them the ability and software to go quickly like other sports do. But something has to be done. And I'm going to tell you why I'm bringing this up now. We've been talking about this for years and for months since the beginning of the season. But I had a casino executive recently tell me, if the NFL doesn't do something, it's going to hurt them, because at some point we're going to have to consider taking NFL stuff off the board, and they can't afford that. They need us with the betting component to help them. Your thoughts on the whole mess? I know you're the guy that used to talk about rating officials. I know coaches who've told me in college basketball, college football, and the pros, they scout the refs and game plan around them. Rick, you're one of the most brilliant minds in the NFL. How does this get fixed?
Well, I think the problem is there's a complete lack of consistency. You've got 17 crews, and all of them seem to see the game differently. And some crews call a lot of penalties. Some crews call few penalties. Some crews home teams like. Some crews visiting teams like. I think, now this is radical. I do think they need full-time officials. And if it was me, I would set up a home base in either Dallas or Chicago, probably Dallas because of the weather. And I'd have my officials live here year round. And what you do is they'd fly out to the game on Saturday, do the game, fly in back to Dallas Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, and Thursday, put all officials of all 17 crews in an auditorium and watch film of all the games. And look at the penalties and try to see why one crew calls one thing and one crew calls another, and try to get a consistency in the call. You're going to have 17 crews watching a particular pass interference call. You can hash over that. Why was that called? Should that have been a penalty? Shouldn't have been a penalty. The problem is, your guy Hondo told you, yeah, they look at film, but they look at film with their own crew. They're not looking at the others. And I think you've got to look at all 17 crews and figure out what's a penalty and what's not a penalty and get them all on the same page. So then they spend 3 days there, have Friday off, travel the games Saturday, do the game Sunday, fly back Monday, and then go back to work again. But I do think you've got to sit all these crews together and have them watch all the games at the same time and analyze all the calls.
Oh, that's a good point. I wouldn't have thought of that, but I like that idea, having them come together and watch every game. And then maybe even if there's something controversial, have the ref explain it to the others what he was seeing. Do you
Exactly.
like that?
Exactly. You're going to hold all the officials accountable for calls that were made, calls that weren't made. And I think that's the only way you're going to develop is some consistency if you have all 17 crews sitting there watching the same games real time and going over all the calls. And the other thing I'd propose to make it better, the league rates the officials on calls they make and calls they don't make. At the end of the season, there's a grading system and puts together these all-star crews for the playoff. For the biggest games of the season, you're going to put together a crew that's never worked together. And I think that's not doing justice to the game. What I would do is I would have, instead of the league rating the officials, say after the 16th week, I'd ask the head coaches and general managers which crews advance and have the coaches and general managers vote on which crews get playoff games. And I think you'd foster a better relationship on the field between crews and coaches, because the referees are now going to be beholden to the coaches in the game itself, not New York City and the people doing the grading. The NFL GMs and coaches know who the best crews are. And those are the ones they want to advance as a crew, not an all-star crew, as a crew. Advance those crews to do the biggest games of the season.
That's absolutely phenomenal. All right. Now, I want to throw another one out. I know enough officials who I respect as men of character,
Sure.
men that are good men. I don't believe in any way that the NFL's rigged. I want to make that very clear. But there are so many bad calls that would you agree something has to happen? They've got to fix this and get this addressed immediately. Do you agree or no?
Yeah, I agree. And I think you're right. They're probably better served with an eye in the sky. An official in the press box say, look, that was not a good call. Let's revoke that penalty. Let's fix this. You have the ability to fix it right now, as opposed to having a bad call impact the entire game.
Right. I am going on a fishing trip in May with an NFL executive. You know who it is. I told you who it is. And we were talking about the trip a couple of days ago, and I mentioned to him, I was stunned, even though I would not hire Belichick. I was stunned that somebody out there didn't give Belichick an opportunity this year because he's the best coach in NFL history. He disagreed with me. He goes, I certainly think he's on the Mount Rushmore. He goes, I'm not saying he's not great. He says, but I don't think he's the greatest. He mentioned Andy Reid has done it with multiple quarterbacks. And he goes, and Joe Gibbs did it with 3. And oh, by the way, none of Gibbs is Hall of Famer. Obviously, Patrick Mahomes, I think, is going to be a Hall of Famer. I think that's a pretty safe bet.
Mm-hmm.
And he talked about what Belichick was only with one quarterback. I'm curious. You are friends with Andy and Bill. You know them. They're guys that you know personally, respect them. What do you think of that executive's thoughts? And where do they sit in your opinion?
I think they're both great coaches. But if you look at the coaches in the Hall of Fame, Paul Brown, one quarterback, Otto Graham. Vince Lombardi, one quarterback, Bart Starr. Chuck Noll, one quarterback, Terry Bradshaw. Bill Walsh, one quarterback, Joe Montana. Jimmy Johnson, one quarterback, Troy Aikman. Bill Belichick, one quarterback, Tom Brady. The bulk of these Hall of Fame coaches were one championship quarterback coaches. And I think, as you know, the quarterback position is so key. And these guys all had Hall of Fame quarterbacks. I personally think that what Joe Gibbs did is the most amazing. And he won 3 Super Bowls without a single Hall of Fame quarterback. Now, Bill never won one without Brady, and Reed hasn't won one without Mahomes. Again, they're one championship quarterbacks. Because, Andy got there with Donovan McNabb, but he didn't win there. So, again, these guys are all one. You almost have to judge the coach based on the quarterback, but not so Gibbs. And he did Rippon, Williams, and who am I drawing a blank here? Theismann. He did it with 3 guys not in the Hall of Fame that haven't even come up in discussion for the Hall of Fame. That's great coaching. So I think, and I've written things in the past, I think Joe Gibbs was the best ever.
I want to turn to a Raider who a lot of people believe should be in the Hall of Fame. I think he should be there. He's a guy that, to me, the game has evolved away from his position, and I think he's hurt because the game has changed. But that's Todd Christensen. Again, I think this guy should be there, but you're a Hall of Fame voter. Your opinion is a million times more valuable than mine. What are your thoughts on him?
I think Todd Christensen is a player that deserves consideration, deserves discussion in the Hall of Fame. And that's the problem I have with the selection process. We don't cycle enough people through the room for whatever reason. I know 2 of the factors: 75% of all players in the Hall of Fame made all decade. Todd didn't make all decade. 64% won championships. Todd did win championships. But this is a guy who won 2 receiving titles. He was in that bridge era of tight ends where they moved from blockers to pass catchers. Charlie Sanders, Ozzie Newsome, Kellen Winslow, Todd Christensen, and he's the one guy that's fallen through the cracks. I think he belongs. For the longest time, we didn't put tight ends in. And now with the explosion of numbers, we're going to be looking at Jason Witten's and the Travis Kelce's and the Rob Gronkowski's. And Todd doesn't have numbers that rank with those players. But you have to understand the game changed. It's easier to pass now. You can't play defense. You can't hit these guys more than 5 yards down the field. I think if Todd had made the all-decade team of the 1980s, I think his chances would have been better. But again, Ben Coates was an all-decade tight end in the 1980s. He's never been discussed. He needs to be discussed. Todd Christensen needs to be discussed. Pete Retzlaff in the 1950s, maybe the first great tight end, needs to be discussed. There are a lot of tight ends right now that need to be discussed that are Hall of Fame worthy players, and I think Todd Christensen is among those.
You are the perfecter of the modern NFL mock draft among media. I just put mine out. And the way I do mine is I talk to as many NFL people as I can to get their input, where they think people are going. I talk to scouts all the time who are telling me, boy, Raiders are giving a lot of attention to this person, that person. I talk to people in the building, outside the building, all of it. But you perfected it. Owners called you. General managers called you before the draft, during the draft. I'm not going to ask you to tell any names or stories that you can't tell. But at the height of your mock drafts, what was that like, your interaction with owners and general managers?
Well, I was the one guy that was talking to all 32 teams. I had a network of about 130 people I was talking to. And I'm talking about area scouts, personnel directors, general managers, assistant coaches, head coaches, an occasional owner, even agents trying to get a feel. A lot of times the agents know who's looking at their players. And you try to talk to all these people and get all these diverse opinions and try to pull it all together and figure out not only a mock draft, but I had a full draft board. I'd research 600 players, and I try to figure out how to stack 1 through 600. Now only 255 of them were getting drafted. I had a lot of guys on my board that were not getting drafted, but I try to stack the entire board, and then you approach the mock, because at that point now in April, you're looking at the team needs, or they're picking, and you try to match it up with the value of player on the board. So if I had a tight end at 15 and a club needed a tight end at 14 or 16, it was easy to lock that guy in place there. It's a long process. I started at the after the Super Bowl, I would research all the players that were at the combine, and I'd have an idea at the combine, who the good players were, who the good players weren't, and start stacking the board there, start making the calls. There were times I'd be up at 2 o'clock in the morning. There are times I'm calling coaches and scouts at 5 in the morning. These are, a lot of times 20-hour work days trying to put all this information together. And at the bottom line, it was pretty good. One GM told me they considered me the 33rd team because I had the one consensus board, and I shared information with teams, and they shared information with me. And a lot of times I got calls that last week. Where do you have this guy? Well, why do you have him that low? Why do you have him that high? And that's and I give them the scouting reports that I had, and they would take it and what they want with it.
You were so well respected around the league, and one man that respected you and you respected him, I don't think it was friendship, but it was mutual respect, was Al Davis. What stood out to you the most about Al?
I think Al had a spirit of fair play. And I think you saw it with his dealings with the league, with his dealings with his team, his dealings with opponents. I think Al had great respect for the opponents. I think he respected the Broncos, the Chiefs, the Chargers, because he was competing with them. He didn't necessarily have to like them, but he respected them. And I think Al he dealt everybody fairly with a healthy dose of respect, even the media.
Well, I don't have your connections, but I try to follow your example with my mock drafts, and you are certainly the best that there is. He is the one and only. Last question for you.
Sure.
And Amy Trask is a person that obviously the first female president of a team. She was Al's right-hand lady for so long. What was your impression of Amy Trask when she, worked with Al and then ran the Raiders?
She was one of a kind. I think she was the glue to that organization. Al was out doing his thing, and you got the coaches and the players, and Amy was the one stable factor in the front office that kind of held the whole thing together. I think she could talk to Al. She could tell Al if something was wrong, something was right. I think she had the same accent with the head coach. Again, if she felt something was wrong, something was right. She was unique. She was different. She held the whole thing together, I think.
I don't think a person should get in the Hall of Fame just because of, she's the first woman. But I am curious, do you think she belongs in Canton?
Yeah, I'm not a person that says a person doesn't belong, but I do think she needs discussion. I think a lot more people need discussion than we're seeing. I'm talking coaches, players, executives, anybody that impacted the game. We put the Sables, Steve and Ed Sable, in for the contributions they made to NFL films, which helped grow the game. I think Amy certainly deserves discussion because she was the first, and because the quality of work that she did with the Raiders. That's a championship franchise. Again, there's so many people that need discussion, and Amy is in that group that needs discussion.
Awesome. He is a living legend that you get the privilege of hearing from. I get the privilege of calling him my friend and mentor. I love it. Every deep dive article, every big article I do, he looks at it. He'll make suggestions. He edits. I mean, the guy is, I do what I do because of him. My father honored him. My father revered him. And so I got that reverence for him. And then to have one day met him and then him become a friend, I can tell all of you, as great of a writer as Rick Goslin is, he's an absolutely better human being. I'm a better person because he's in my life. I love him dearly. Rick, it's always a pleasure. Thank you for being so gracious with your time. Hold on, if you would. I want to tell you something real quick. Remember, that's the great Rick Goslin. I'm Hondo Carpenter from Sports Illustrated's Fan Nation Las Vegas Raiders Insider Podcast. You can find me on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Hondo Carpenter, and on Instagram at Hondo SR. Thanks, everybody.